Hi, everybody. I'm here with Michael from Equitas, and we are talking about recruiter enablement. We're talking about a very specific element of it, which is assessment. And how do you help your recruiters to do assessment in the right way for your company and without them having to break a whole load of sweat in making it all happen? So, hands up, I'm a talent attraction guy by background, so this is not my forte, which is why I'm doing some interviews with people about this subject. Michael, give us a quick intro to you and your background, and also give us a bit of an Equitas pitch before we get into it.
I will do. We could not be any different, Adam. Ask me to find you 1,000 candidates, I'd struggle. That was your background through and through, wasn't it? Candidate ID. But give me 1,000 candidates and pick out the top 10%, 1% who's best for the role. That was my whole background in industry and career and what I used to do. So I used to be professional interviewer and assessment specialist. Some of the companies that I worked for, Transport for London, B-Sky-B, Ministry of Justice. If you name a government department that's in London, I've probably interviewed for them at some stage. So some really interesting niche ones that I hadn't even heard of before, like DEFRA, and some super interesting assessments in around there. And prison service, I helped them hire 5,000 prison officers with a load of super interesting assessments back in those days as well. It was also the whole reason that I set up Equitas, was to try and solve for this problem. So it used to be me sat in a room interviewing a candidate, sometimes with a hiring manager, sometimes on my own. We would try and follow best practice. You had good hiring managers, you had bad. I'm sure a lot of the folks who are really honing in on recruiter enablement will see this firsthand. Some great ones who could train the rest of the team, others that they probably don't even want to put near candidates at the same time as well. So with Equitas, what we decided to do was try to solve for bias, which you can never really get rid of completely within the interview piece of the puzzle. But what we help folks do is capture their interview data. So audio, transcribe to text. We give them auto cue for interview. So good standard structured interview questions popping up in front of them, loads of probes so they can dig down deeper in each behavior, competency, value that they're assessing against. And then we try to auto generate candidate feedback to make sure that every single interview that you do is helping build your employer brand by giving candidates more feedback than they ever would have got in the past. Big in public sector. I think that's because of my background. Irish NHS, really big customer of ours. Healthcare, really used to that level of structure for interviews. But anyone who wants to adopt that kind of best practice approach and sort of the scientifically proven best way to hire folks in the late stage of the assessment piece of the puzzle, that's where Equitas comes in. I could probably talk to you all day, even about the intro alone, but any bits you want me to dig into in more detail?
Well, yeah, look, I mean, you've already said several things, which is 100 is entirely recruiter enablement. I'll come back to that in the Equitas context in a minute, but let's talk about assessment more generally. If I'm a talent attraction expert, if I'm becoming head of talent acquisition, right, and I don't actually know very much about assessment, what are the main things that I need to be thinking about? And I know it's horses for courses, and I know that every organization and every role profile is probably going to be quite difficult. But if you can chunk up and go okay, the overview is here's the things you need to be thinking about. Let's talk about it at that level first.
So if we go right into the stratosphere, it's not overcomplicating things. And this is what folks always will do. They'll start to go into the nuances of even what we call it. Is it a behavior? Is it a competency? Is it a value? Whatever way you want to break it down, one of my favorite folks that everyone should follow in this space is a guy called Jamie Betts, got a company called Neurosight, and he broke it down so simply for me. He says, call it what you will, Michael, but what are we assessing them on? Do they have the abilities to do this job? Is it future? Is potential that you're hiring on? And call it whatever you want. Traits, constructs, and all of them can interlink. And even at the moment, skills. Everyone's talking about skills-based hiring left, right, and center. It's just another tag on what are we looking for this particular role now, and something that's going to future-proof it to some degree. So sometimes people are just like, we need to reinvent the wheel completely, or we're moving to skills, bin everything, competencies, get rid of all old approaches as well, which is not the right approach. It's literally look at those kind of materials that we've got and what are the key ways that we're going to assess them down the funnel. And it can change throughout one organization. Look, are you doing low level, sort of entry level hiring at high volume? Process would look different from if you're hiring constantly at the most senior levels, project teams as well. So there's a lot of structure there to be kind of learnt from other folks within the space and see what they've tried and tested and worked before. But tons of stuff and new tools coming in that can disrupt it completely. And I'm sure you're seeing it with some of the stuff that you're getting on Poetry at the minute and the different ways that they can tweak and change that process. I'd split it down into like 4 broad categories. So attraction, what are you doing up front there? And what are the types of behaviors and values that you kind of want to mention there to attract them in, the right folks, good if they opt out as well. Next, how are you sifting them? Or as some people coin it, pre-hire assessments, look, before they even get an interaction with a human, how are you narrowing it down to make sure that you're speaking and spending the most time with the right folks? And then the next stage down is, hey, are you doing interviews, assessments, take-home tests, things like that, and designing a process that works for you. Some folks love highly automated, other folks prefer far sort of more personal kind of touch. And then whenever it comes to the interview piece, that's where I can sit and chat for them a days on structure of interviews, number of rounds that they potentially do off the back of it. I tell you a framework that I love, and I know that you'll see in the past, was the RL100, had a hiring maturity matrix as well. That's great for working out like what are the pieces of the puzzle that we need to focus on, what level of detail do we need to go across those kind of broad categories. And what I'm hoping someone creates, or maybe we need to spend a bit of time in marketing and do this as well, is a DEI hiring maturity matrix as well, because for us, the whole reason that we set up the company was for fair hiring and to reduce bias across the whole process. Lots of cool tools out there that are helping people do that as well. So it probably comes right back to what are they trying to achieve with the assessment process top down.
Okay. So
right. Firing loads of info at you.
no, not at all, not at all. I'm a fan of a maturity matrix as well, and we created one for recruiter enablement. So
Nice.
I wonder, like if I think about enabling recruiters in, for me, enabling recruiters is about like giving them everything they need right in front of them at the point they need it, or like one button click and it's there, making it as easy as possible. The ultimate way to do assessment, to me, seems like it's basically entirely automated. So you've talked about the transcription, you talked about like interview questions coming up on screen and all that sort of thing. I'm sure that there's a balance between a completely automated experience versus the personal touch, because you still need to try and pitch the candidate during this process. I think you've got to build rapport in some circumstances. How do you think about this in terms of like just totally automated or human touch included?
So there's some folks doing it at the minute, which is super interesting to see the full automation one. And I don't think, I've not heard it yet from the market, the candidates want it. Like if you go back to the simplest inception of this, it's one-way video interviews. And I'm been a massive sort of detractor from that space forever, because I saw it in my old career whenever we were doing early careers. And they would just be like, hey, do a 20, 30-minute interview, answer all these questions, and that's it, done. And there wasn't always like that two-way conversation. And like some of the best candidates would opt out. The next generation of tools that people are trying to build are like, hey, can we have some sort of voice technology do this, or some sort of avatar delivering on that? Will it give candidates good experience or not? It comes back to that point where it's just like they want to engage with the human whenever they get to the interviews. Like they're as much assessing the employer, what it might be like to work there, and seeing if they want to actually take the plunge and jump and dedicate, who knows, 12, 24 months, 3, 5 years, if not longer within a space. You see, nail on the head, you've hit it right. Whenever they're enabling their recruitment team, they need to teach their hiring managers, like, look, here's how you interview well, here's how you sell a role without overselling it, and here's why we use structure and how to do it. Like, I'm a massive fan on values hiring, because you can just get folks to opt out if it's not a good fit. If you're asking good structured questions that like link into that, you know they're going to hit the ground running. First 90 days, they'll achieve more if there's good alignment on that side of things. Doesn't mean that you don't ask any kind of past experience questions or things like that. But if you've got someone who's super motivated for the role, has some level of conscientiousness, and that there's a values alignment, doesn't have to be everything across the board, just a good few of them, then they're going to be so much better than just asking, like vanilla questions and not really probing or prompting deeper. And that's for enabling your hiring managers. The prompting piece is critical and key. And like whenever I introduce folks to Equitas, I say, look, these are going to cover like 80, maybe 90% of the follow-ons you might have to ask. You, to be an inclusive interviewer, still need to use a bit of common sense. You need to probe, you need to dig deeper. If there's any red flags comes out, you don't just ignore it. You dive in and you still ask follow-on questions. So yes, on consistency, but a little bit of common sense and like, just when to dig in and make sure that you're getting the best out of every candidate. And like, that's why it comes back to me, the quality of interview questions is absolutely critical. You can capture all your interview data and there's amazing tools out in the market that'll help you do that. But if your interviewers aren't asking good quality interview questions and you're not teaching them how, it's a pointless exercise. You could throw as much compute at transcript as you want. If you're not capturing data in an effective way, you and your hiring managers, your interviewers, you're screwed. And the negative that could come off the back of it is if they're asking the wrong questions.
So let's talk about putting it into the hands of recruiters and hiring managers. I'm quite intrigued by the fact that you've talked about hiring managers a lot, because I guess, yeah, like they are the furthest away from being a trained interviewer. So, like, what's the best way to set a recruiter and a hiring manager up for the most success? Like, I'm talking about the tactical implementation of the questions on the screen. You talked about that. I mean, that's amazing. Like, what are the things that we need to do?
So purely on interviews?
Well, no, just on assessment generally. How do we make sure that recruiters don't and hiring managers don't go wrong? And how do we make sure that they don't have to click loads and loads of different buttons to find out what to do? Like, for example, I've heard several times recently, recruiters have said to me, my biggest problem is when I need to go to the hiring manager to ask them to create a scenario and questions related to that scenario for me to give to the candidate to get them prepped or to get them to fill something in or whatever. When I need to go to my hiring managers to get competency-based questions relevant to that job, the process stalls because they don't do it. And I'm like, wow, this is like mental. We absolutely need to make things so simple that you don't have to wait for people to give you this stuff.
The most frightening one I've heard on that, and I'll not name names or anything, but it was when hiring managers were picking interview questions, not using Equitas. This was just manual process, paper-based, super old school. And they were picking questions based on the CV that they liked the most, because that's who they wanted to get through, get the role. So that's when it gets really frightening in terms of these are folks that aren't interviewing day in, day out. They might do a handful of interviews a quarter, 6 months, a year. So you need to make their life as easy as possible. If you've already done a load of question banking, great. That's something that we help folks do across behaviors, competency, values, just so, and it's not about overkill. I've had one customer that had 200 plus planning and organization questions. There's not 200 ways to ask planning and organizing ever. And like, that's a product, a sort of, what would you call it? An product improvement, where we're just like, let's cap this and bring it down and not have a crazy amount of questions.
Less is more in a situation like that, right? I mean, like the amount of duplication there must be in there, the amount of there's a I mean, you'll know this concept from building a tech company, but like just the concept of don't make me think. Like, every time somebody has to think about whether to turn left or right at that based on a whole variety of criteria, no, they need to get to that junction and they know to turn left, and then they know to turn right. You've got to make it as simple as possible. So 200 questions about planning is mental.
And this is why I love some of the customers who use this. So Charles Tyrrell, the shirt company as well, they had a values framework, had too many questions, narrowed it down to 7 for each one, from junior to senior. Covers everything they need. And like, they're so easy to work with that it's unreal, because they're just like, yeah, based on the role, here's the values, level seniority, bang, they can select it, set it up in less than a couple of minutes, which is absolutely golden. So that's it. If you are building up question banks to try and make folks' lives a lot easier, you don't need hundreds and hundreds of questions under every area. 10, 15, 20 absolute max would cover everything that you need to. And then if you do need to tailor down for specific roles, you can. Like, you don't do that within the probes, and not just the main questions alone. Otherwise, it becomes like death of Goldilocks, too much choice, too many, too few, what's right, what's just in between, and what you need within there. And then what I would say is it's teaching hiring managers and just being like, look, why are we doing this? Why are we using this approach? all they should be focused on during interviews is two things: capturing as much data as possible so that you can make an objective decision based on that content, whether it's written, typed, or whether it's a transcript if you're using tool, and reviewing everything. Don't shorten it right down to a bullet point or two, because essentially you want to make sure you see the good, the bad, everything in between, so that you're making a balanced decision within there. And then for scoring, that's always really hard because sometimes people simplify it too much. Sometimes they're just like thumbs up, thumbs down in ATS, done. But actually coaching and teaching your hiring manager and interviewers, okay, what does resilience mean, or customer success for our particular company? If we define that really well and define how we want to score this question, multiple positive and negative indicators within there, it's an absolute game changer, because then you have a common language that you're working towards, that you're scoring. And whenever you give that feedback to the candidates, like, oh, cocked up my customer success question and it told me exactly why. It was too simple, focused on one customer. This actual role would involve dealing with hundreds. It's a high volume role. I'll choose a different one next time, and really helping them on your journey. And that's one of the pieces. Like, candidate feedback comes up all the time, and I think it's a genuine fear for interviewers and for hiring managers and even recruiters, sometimes worried about getting it wrong. And for those candidates that kick back, and you'll always get maybe 1 in 100 who will give you a bit of a hard time, but I'd say a good 30 or 40 of the other ones will actually give you positive notes and be like, thanks, we normally get ghosted at this stage, really appreciate it, so I can move on with my job search, and know what's gone wrong there as well. So like, that side of it makes your life so much easier in the long run. If every time you're running a hiring process, you're giving feedback, knowing that folks might come back in. Probably some of the stuff that you did with candidate ID in the past as well, where you're just like, hey, applied for a job before, really good fit, just missed out, silver or bronze medalist, let's get them involved again. And like, I think that's what everyone's trying to solve for in our space. I think it was Jacob Madsen who always said 90% is waste. I'm not saying that the candidates, are waste themselves. It's just the process. So much gets wasted. But how do we give them such a good experience that we can funnel them back through quicker than ever before? And I think that's what that's the holy grail in our space, is there's an effective way of doing that and getting folks back in time and time again. And if you've already assessed them and against really solid behaviors, indicators, everything you're doing, like, there's got to be a way to help them find a job either internally or helping them elsewhere as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree and understand all of that. I think that I'm very excited about what you're talking about, because I think about a lot of the things that you're talking about, and the way that you described Equitas earlier, by the way, it's like, I think that you are aiming to simplify things so that they can be used better, and that's what recruiter enablement is very much all about. And the one that I'm hoping gets simplified further is employee referral, because it's still a real manual, scrappy task, and I hope that gets cracked. But it sounds like you've been doing it, and I'm sure other people have as well. But it sounds like you've been really focused on this in the area of assessment.
It is, and like, I could talk to you about assessments all day long, and it's like you said, even if I upskill the world of interviewers by like 10-20% for the folks who use the product, I'm happy. We're not going to eliminate bias forever, and even folks using AI tools and say they will, there's always algorithmic bias. But if we can just make it that little bit fairer for folks who use us, I'll die a happy man. And being a startup founder, maybe death always impending in terms of the stress.
Yeah, absolutely. Michael, I could talk to you about it all day as well, but we're keeping these bite-sized. So thank you very much for joining. I'd just like to say to anybody watching this that has been offended by my use of the word mental, which I said twice to mean a way of me amplifying bad decision. With hindsight, that probably wasn't a great word to use, and actually I'll be a bit more mindful about not using that in the future. But anyway, thank you very much, Michael. Great to see you, and all the best.
Always. Chat to you soon, Adam. Cheers.